or something.
Hey, well, it was there, and so she was gonna take both of them, they were taking it, and I was like, oh. And then she came back and she said, my brother says we have to bring that home, so now we have to have one. I'm like, okay. You must not have cookies at your house.
All right, we're gonna go ahead and call the meeting to order. Yes.
David Warren, here. Brad Smith.
Here.
Josh Henry.
Present.
Don Baker.
Here.
Keith Gordon.
Yep.
If we could stand and say the pledge of allegiance. Pledge allegiance
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Very well. Yes, he's right there. Yeah. I'll let Justin go ahead and present on the audit report.
Alright, so each of the board members, you have two documents in front of you. I'm really going to go over this. This is kind of the meat and potatoes of the report. There's a lot to this document if you ever want to go through it, but the graph analysis that you will be looking at kind of covers the most important parts of it. Alright, so first is the independent auditor's report. It's the page 1 of the larger document, and it's pretty much our whole point of being here. You know, to provide an opinion on your financial status and whether or not you're in compliance with laws and regulations. You guys received a clean report with no extra wording and no modified wording, so it's a standard clean report that we agree that your numbers are in accordance with GAAP. So congratulations, that's like the whole point of us coming out and doing this audit. So then we're also required to provide 2 other letters. The first one is because you're a government entity. It's called the Government Auditing Standards Letter, and we are required to communicate items related to New York State school laws and GAGAS accounting, government auditing standards. So the first one is the Internal Control over Financial Reporting. This one is related to us helping put together this large document. So, you know, there's a lot that goes into putting this thing together. Most school districts don't do it themselves. They require assistance from us to put it together. And on top of that, they sometimes require us to provide some adjustment entries to get them to be in accordance with GAAP. We actually had called yours a significant deficiency. In the past, it was considered a material weakness. Significant deficiency is actually a lower level of a finding. So you're improving. We haven't made as many entries as we have in the past, and learning and picking up on some of the entries we're doing. So that finding specifically was downgraded to a lesser extent. The second finding there is a compliance finding related to your unassigned fund balance. So New York State requires that you keep your fund balance within 4% of next year's budget, your unassigned fund balance. Currently, you guys are at about 5%. So you're a little bit over the threshold there. Compared to your peers, you're really not that out of line. We've seen as high as 20% at some schools. So, really what this comes down to is managing your budget, making sure you're not building too much equity, and if you do have equity, finding a place to put it in reserves and things like that that you're legally allowed to do. The second letter we had to provide this year was related to the single audit. So because you received over $750,000 in federal assistance in the forms of grants, you are required to have what's called a uniform guidance for single audit completed. So there was no findings related to your single audit. We tested your school lunch program and your IDA program. So. Now last year you weren't a single audit. You received a grant this year that kind of threw you over the 750 threshold. You guys are usually pretty close to that. So if you look at the GASB 34 section, this is a consolidated statement. It's all of your funds kind of mingled together. If you look at this, it's very consistent. You guys, most of your peers implemented something called GASB 75 this year. It's a new regulation. Well, you did it last year. So because you guys did it last year, I mean, you guys are very flat in terms of your assets, liabilities in that position. And then also, if you look at the second page, the activities, so the income and revenue, you're very flat across the board. $700,000 increase for your combined financial statements. So very, when you're talking $40 million of assets and liabilities and equity, that's a very consistent, very level amount. All right. So we'll talk about your general fund a little bit. So this is more your day-to-day operations, where mostly what Aaron looks at on a day-to-day basis, where checks come out of. Your assets, liabilities, and fund equity here are very consistent again. It was kind of a slow year in terms of there's nothing that jumped out in terms of expenses or liabilities and assets that came up. So this kind of looking at the assets broken out, you can see there, cash due to other funds, federal and state, everything with it. Common theme was consistency here this year. So this is your liabilities broken out. Now there are kind of some offsetting things here that kept it consistent. You'll see here you had no accounts payable in the current year. That was about $700,000 decrease. Well, it was offset by an increase in this due to other funds. So that's essentially like an IOU between funds. And then teachers' retirement is probably also a significant decrease, and that's really due to the rates this year. The rates actually went down compared to the prior year from, I think it was 11.7 last year to 9.8. So then this is your equity and what makes up your equity. You can see here your restricted reserves increased about $800,000. That's related to the capital reserve you funded this year. Unassigned went down slightly. That's what that really is related to is, when you assign equity to a reserve, it comes out of this pool. So it's just moving over here to an assigned amount. So we'll look at your revenues. Your revenues were up about 3%. Not very much, again, very consistent. You can see here the areas of revenue. Really the only change was in state sources, and that was related to basic aid that came in. So what the state gave you in basic, just general aid, was higher this year. Now in the general fund expenditures, this decreased about $2 million, or 14%. But really it's because of something you did last year where you had a capital project going on. You transferred $2 million over to get that capital project going. Well, that shows up as an expenditure gain. Well, you didn't do that this year, so that one-time expenditure is gone. So that's really what the change is. If you were to factor out that interfund transfer, your expenses are only up 4%. So again, very consistent, right in line with the 3% increase in revenue. And you can see that here. So your instruction had some cost increase. Pupil transportation, general support were very consistent. Employee benefits, nothing changed really. Health insurance is up a little bit, but nothing significant. And you can see that transfer last year is really the big driver there. And this slide looks at it from a different perspective. So instead of looking at instruction versus pupil transportation versus general support, this one is looking at it based on what type of expenditure. So you can see that most of that increase in instruction probably came from salaries. Everything else across the board, pretty consistent. I'll go to the next slide here. So this is your net income. This shows, pretty steady. You're above zero, so you're making money each year. Once again, that transfer is really affecting that number there. If that wasn't there, your revenue would range from about 150 to 800,000, I think, in the max. So very consistent. We see a lot of schools where this graph looks more up and down. For that to only be what caused that factor there. Other than that, it's, that's what you want to see. You want to see consistent gains. And you don't want to see large gains either, though, because then the state will come in and say you're not really planning as well as you should be. But if you're staying within probably this bracket here, you're doing a pretty good job. And you are, with the exception of that transfer, but that's a known factor. So, commend the business office on their budgeting and their attempts to keep those costs in line, because that's not something that's really done consistently across the state.
Job, Aaron.
Alright, so next we'll look at the food service fund. So the food service fund had a couple swings in it. I'll go to this next tab. We'll talk about the revenue. Your revenue was up about 16,000, very minor increase, only a couple percentage points. And you can see here, it's all in your federal sources. Really what that is the New York State and federal government gave better rates this year. Now you also see part of what helped is this interfund transfer. So the general fund supplied $66,000 this year, or in the past they had been $50,000, to allow the school lunch fund to be profitable, or at least not as negative as it is. So, I mean, you guys went to the community-wide, which is, you know, a decision you made to help the district as overall in providing free lunches. And because of that, there is some cost to the general fund each year, just because otherwise the school lunch fund is operating in a deficit. But as far as you're talking $50,000 to keep it kind of break even, it's not too terrible. So if you look here, your costs in the current year, and this is part of the reason why that transfer went up, they did increase a little bit more than your expenditures. And I'll show you why on this next slide. You know, pretty much your salaries were up some, but the big driver here was employee benefits. Your health insurance, your retirement rates, things like that didn't really change that much, the rates for that. So what probably caused that is, you know, individuals going from being single to family. And that really can significantly impact that number as you see here. And as long as those individuals are on family, that's gonna be an ongoing expense that you'll see each year. So you may wanna start budgeting to make that transfer over from the general fund each year, because that cost is going to stay there, it's going to remain, and will most likely increase as health rates go up. So here you can see your net income each year. So you've made money a couple times, but I mean, even here you made $4,000, but you did transfer 50,000 over. So actually without that transfer, it was more like a loss of 46, but pretty consistent losses for the last few years. And then that health insurance thing is really kind of driving that larger loss this year. And you can see what it's done to your equity. You had equity of 60,000 in 2014, and it's right at zero now. So when we made that transfer to make equity zero, so there wouldn't be a deficit. But it is something to watch at over the next couple of years, be cognizant of, think about how you want to fund that, just to make sure it doesn't go into a deficit, or if it does, it's not too large of a deficit. So this slide is just discussing your state aid or special aid. So it talks about your state revenue and your federal revenue. So whenever you receive grants, for grants like the Title I grant, state would be pre-K grants, things like that. They get recorded here. Also, I mean, really, you're pretty consistent from this year to last year. What happened out here is UPK, 3 PK grants started getting received out here. But this small increase here in the current year for federal revenue is related to that ARC grant, the Appalachian Region Commission. So that's what's driving that. And that grant is actually what kind of threw you guys over the threshold to require a single audit. So that may be required again next year. But that is, you know, you'll see that these numbers are pretty consistent just because it's what the state allocates to you for those grants. Okay. And lastly, we provide what we call a management letter. So we have 4 general comments that are related to your financial statements as a whole, and then we have the extra classroom activity funds that we do a kind of separate management letter related to. So the fund balance is the same management letter we provided last year. It's just there's a lot of scrutiny on those fund balance accounts and what's in those reserve accounts. So just make sure you're up to date on what you're allowed to do And specifically in that comment, we talk about the EBLAR reserve, just making sure you're funding it and spending it in accordance with laws. Letter B is talking about that loss in the food service fund. It is losing money. So, just making sure you're aware that it is losing money and the general fund is supporting it each year with a little bit of help in the form of an interfund transfer to make sure it's not running at a deficit. C, the capital project funds. This is related to old funds that could be closed out. So on your books, Aaron has what are called sub-funds. So it's, there's a capital project fund, but each project is kind of accounted for differently. There are some older sub-funds that could be closed out related to prior projects. So she just has to look into how those were sourced, how they were funded with revenue. If it's funded with that, it should go to your debt service. If it was funded by interfund transfer, it should go back to the general fund. Letter D is a new one. It's transparency reporting. This is new across the state. We're just kind of letting you know that this is coming down. Like, I believe you guys aren't on the docket until 1920, so it's something you don't have to worry about for a few years. What the state is requiring schools to do is to break out their expenses between elementary, high school, junior high if they have it, and kind of allocating those expenses to make sure one group isn't receiving a disproportionate share of resources than the other group. Really, probably what brought this on were large school districts where they had multiple elementary schools and they don't want one elementary school in the poorer section of town not receiving as much as a larger elementary school in a nicer area of town. Well, you don't have that here. You're a central school. So, it'll be interesting to see what they come up with for your central schools. I'm not sure just how pertinent that data is going to be to them. So I don't know what they want to receive from that. And there really is no guidance at this point in time of what to do. Some schools in the area have had to do it and they couldn't get nothing from the state in terms of how they should report it. So hopefully by the time 1920 comes around, that school year, there'll be a little more guidance, there'll be a little more understanding about what is required of you.
Now, the dates that they come in effect, is that due to priority, like we're a central school, so we're late pushed?
So if you looked around and thought of some school districts that have multiple schools within them, they would be the districts that have already been required to do it. So, Olean, Pioneer, things like that, they've already been required to report on this. So then the other management letter comment is on the extra classroom. These are actually the three same comments we had last year. Point of sale records, it's a common theme in all school districts, just the kids don't turn them in. So when we go to look at the receipt documentation, it's not there. And the state requires pretty strict guidelines on what is a point of sale documentation. And most schools receive this. You're not alone here. Inactive activity funds. So you do have a couple funds on your books that don't have anything going on. So I don't know if you have a policy on what to do with those, but at some point in time, would be a good idea to review those inactive funds and figure out where you want to send that money, whether it's just the general student council or what. And then the last one, C, is student involvement. The whole point of the extra classroom is to have a student governing body, and those kids are supposed to vote on things and they're supposed to be involved. So there are a few funds that maybe don't have as much student involvement as they probably should. We're just kind of pointing that out to make sure students are involved in the decision-making process of that. Any questions, any comments?
Thank you. Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
All right, that was nice. Try to make it quick for you.
Thank you. I asked Mr. Blivin to come this evening.
Yes.
And to just be in person as per our standard procedure when we have an overnight trip. As you are aware, our basketball team will be playing SIO in Cleveland. And we have a date set finally for that, which is December 8th. And so we are looking to take this team, as well as hopefully a lot of our students, to Cleveland to watch the game at 3 o'clock. And then we have the Cleveland Cavaliers against the Washington Wizards at 7 o'clock that evening. And then they would stay overnight that night and come back the next day. So I asked Coach to be here, add anything if you to as far as fundraising or answer any questions you guys may
Well,
have?
we had a pretty good summer raising money, got roughly $13,000.
Great.
That will take care of our rooms, the kids' rooms, coaches. I told the officials I would pay for them, but they said they would pay for their own, it's just an honor to go. Chris Brooks from the Daily Reporter is gonna go, he'll back his room in his ticket, and that's about it. We got 17 rooms reserved. Mr. Brockway's got a coach bus reserved for us, so we got our room, our transportation, dates, so we're ready to roll. We had to buy, us and Silo had to buy 150 tickets each, which came to $9,000. Our tickets for the game are $30, obviously. We gotta sell them, and that's where we get our money back. And the money we have left over, we'll split up, with Mr. Schmidt, Mr. Brockway, and decide what we wanna do with it. I would like to buy one up for our boys and our girls varsity teams, and after that, it's open for discussion, whatever we wanna do about it. Doing it for some big cause, or for the school, or something.
Any questions?
Questions, comments?
It's on, you'll see it's on the agenda for the first, check that right. It's gonna be on the agenda on the 22nd for, approval. So we have met the two thresholds and then we'll go from there. So if there's any questions from us?
Let me, just for my clarification, because Brian's request says 12/8 and 12/9. This note says the 7th. And I knew there was some discussion about 2 nights
Yep.
stay.
Originally, we talked about going on Friday.
Right.
And staying Friday, Saturday, and the preference of coach and the guys, they decided to just stay Saturday. So
Okay.
they're gonna go up Saturday morning.
It's a lot better. I got traveling there, I didn't think about that, traveling there today both ways is a lot better.
Oh, absolutely.
Especially working out
Absolutely.
that area.
And I knew that originally there was a discussion about leaving after the game to come home, and that was not a good,
That was something not preferred, so.
yeah.
No, so that's what you see with the difference in change.
Okay.
We're all on board on the same dates and that.
Yep.
Is someone gonna be there to live stream?
Good question. It's a question we haven't talked about yet, so I'm not sure if we've been able to.
Yeah, because of the,
I would assume our
Confines
GB game we
of the-
probably could, but I'm not, certainly the,
Yeah,
probably the
that'd
program
be
would be able
close.
to. That's a good question, we'll talk to Mr. Horton about that, if possible, live streaming our game back. Let's, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
You guys.
Yeah, thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Thanks, sir. Get chilly. Thank you. Thanks, buddy. Good luck tomorrow night. Thanks, Mayor. Thanks,
see
lady.
you later.
Yeah, Schmidt. See you soon, bud.
Congratulations on your driving up here. See you, Secretary.
All right, moving on, I need a motion and a second to accept the auditor's report of Monte Whipple with a borrow for the 2017-18 school year. Yeah,
so moved. Second.
I got Amy. And Josh, with the second. Any questions for, now that he's gone, for Aaron? All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Need a motion and second to excise textbooks. There was a list in your packet. Fred? Buddy? Any questions on the textbooks? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Moving on to the addendum, real quick, under financial, approve the extracurricular activity account. Create the Jag Designs Company extracurricular account effective tomorrow, October 2nd.
So moved.
I got Josh with a motion, Donnie, if you're all right with a second.
Sure.
Questions? This is the new entrepreneur course, correct?
Mrs. Marciano's here, and we'd love to speak to this, if given the opportunity.
Give us a lowdown. Ms. Marciano.
We just worked on some of the shirts for homecoming, updated some of the outdated shirts so that they could be sold again. And now today we were in discussions about moving from just doing shirts to doing other kind of promotions, like putting signs outside, possibly outside of, people's houses. Like if you
Athletes'
wanted
houses and stuff like that.
Aqua Jags, or in the band, or obviously at a mine, or
Yeah.
player's name and number, like that kind of thing.
Good idea.
Ideas. So
Yeah.
we're trying.
Any other questions regarding this new account? All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries.
Thank you for coming.
I need a motion and a second. I don't know, I like this, but to appoint Tori Rounds to the civil service position of school security officer effective October 17th with a provisional date including August 17th of 2019.
So,
Bud? Amy? Any questions for Tori? Put him on the spot. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carried. Congratulations, Tori.
Tori, we are going to discuss in the work session your, responsibilities in the first 100 days. I'm basically gonna share with the board, my thoughts. And again, we talked about this, Tori and I met for about, not an hour, but over an hour on Saturday. To go through a lot of the pieces of this. So this document that we'll talk about, I'm sure we will tweak and change.
Yeah.
And update.
Yes, it should.
Yes, it should.
Yeah.
But, you're welcome to stay, but don't feel like you have to. If you have other things going on, you're welcome.
I'm like, I want to practice.
Sounds good. Well, I'm sure I'll catch up with you this Saturday, so congratulations.
See you, Tori.
Thanks.
Have fun.
Either way.
See you later.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Back on the regular agenda, the next page, we need a motion and a second to approve Ron Norsethaporn, or Nora Sethaporn, as they said yesterday, or all day. They couldn't get his name right either.
North of South.
Yeah. To work under Linda Warner with the JV boys soccer program. Who was that?
Buddy,
Buddy?
second.
All those in favor? Opposed?
Ty wants me to vote no. But I'll abstain.
5 yay, 1 abstention, and 1 not here.
That's good, but he was lobbying pretty hard for that too, wasn't he?
Yeah.
Need a motion and a second to create 1 full-time teacher's aide position effective October 23rd. Fred? Second? Amy? Questions?
Just description.
We have a student who
Needs.
requires this service. Not moved the district, starting the district, who did not have the service in place and has since needed the service. Needs the support. That's good.
Any other questions? All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. On to the work session.
So while my boss is still here, we should talk about the boat team. And depending on what
Yes.
you would have some input on this, as you dealt with, you and Aaron, I should say, dealt with Brunt, this last year. From my understanding, it did not go as smoothly as we had hoped, and it certainly wasn't necessarily faster. Given the number of boats that we had, but we also, that was the first year we moved back to 2 polling locations. There were a lot of first-year hiccups, and I would call them first-year hiccups. You guys can define that better for me, if you say so. So before we committed to doing this on an annual basis, we wanted to make sure that the board had an opportunity to say yea or nay. So I wanted Aaron and Penny, Penny, I'll start with you, to talk about some of the hiccups that happened and the time piece that we talked about, the time in particular, with the tailing of the boats as an issue.
Well, the inspectors are
to think about the differences between the general election and the school election, that became a little bit of an issue.
And a lot of work goes into the machine building, it's very expensive, and these a lot, you never know how many are gonna show up, so we fit a lot, we threw a lot away, and they're 50 cents a piece, and you have to get 2 for each voter, so we threw a lot of them away, so it's expensive, and there's a lot of work that goes into working in one company, so I worked with our brother, and she was a company, so a lot of work goes in it, so it's just being able to paper ballot. We just, we put them in-house and a lot less work.
So we had last year's total ballot, I think it was about 300 votes. Last year's at about, it was over 300. So we ended up throwing away about 150 ballots, is that fair to say? At 50 cents a piece. About $75, if my math is correct.
And counting at the end of the night, so when they were counted, so run the machines, it took, time to tally them on the machine, and then, call between the, polling units and stuff, add them together. So I think that if we had paper ballots and you're gonna count them, it's gonna cut the time in half because you're gonna count half of them in Angelica, half in Belmont and call, whereas when you did it all at the school, you're counting all of them in one place and it takes about an hour. So you probably could get them counted in half hour.
And part of that was just the transition time between gathering those in Angelica and then bringing them to.
Is it not? Because I've been there with the general election, in the ballot goes in the machine, stays in the machine, they get a thumb drive, they plug it in the computer, and everything's tallied for them. That's not how this one went?
No, it took a little time to get the final ballot, and then you have the affidavit ones, and then they wait for them, they have to wait for them to come back out of the machine.
Okay.
And collect all them, so the end takes more time to work.
Anyone?
Yeah, I mean, Penny did the brunt of the work, but, it tallied quicker, but I thought it was proper. So, I would be opposed to
So your recommendation, Penny, what are your thoughts?
paper ballots. I think it's easier for Pam. It's not gonna be any quicker at the end of the night to do the machine, just as quick, if not quicker to do the paper ballots, they'll split it into 2 votes.
Now, yeah, would
Less
it be cheaper?
expensive.
Yeah, the more you count, right?
And you would save probably $2,500, right, it was about 2,000
Yeah,
for them to
about
do
that.
it, and then the cost of the ballots, you
No,
would save
right.
about
No,
it's
$2,500.
We had a contract, correct?
Just for 1 year.
And that's what I'm asking, it wasn't
Oh, okay.
a expense.
So you don't see the machine ballots efficiency improving a lot over years? Versus the problems you had today and the expense? You
I mean,
wouldn't
it
see
could've-
enough improvement?
It probably couldn't, I don't.
Yeah, in line with your recommendation, that's what I think.
I'm sure with time, it would get better. It just seemed like it was pretty labor intensive this.
So some of the problems are gonna remain, no matter what.
Yes.
There's a lot of redundancy, to be perfectly honest, a lot of redundancy, and to get those numbers took longer than, most of you have seen this tally, like maybe it was Robert here. And there was the sorting between the two locations plus, that it's even more redundant.
And the board of elections still have to be involved.
No, it's a school election, so.
How are we gonna determine what district they're, where they
No,
go?
that part, they'll give us the registration list,
That's
but as
true.
far as
Right,
running
right,
an
yes.
election, they won't run an election if the only votes at the end will be, they'll give us the voter registration list because they have to be registered with them.
That's what I was just wondering, like, they didn't want somebody named Joe to come over and vote for Belmont, and, do it both ways, and I voted twice.
So they wouldn't happen because it'll be.
So they'll still be involved as far as.
Take 150 and just look at it.
I was watching the math up, I'm sorry.
I wasn't a math guy.
It's all right. Well, I'm not either, but I'm watching Tim do the math, I was impressed with his long So I just bring it to you, we went into this thinking this was going to be an easier process, given that we were going back to 2 voting sites, that it would cut the time and would frankly expedite the process. And I remember when Penny and I had the conversation initially, it was with Penny knowing she was retiring, thinking this would be easier for Pam. And then we went through the process and we found out that in essence, it was actually a little Our recommendation to you is that we go back to paper, but as a board, that is your call. That is your vote that you oversee, so.
I agree.
Works for me.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Penny, is there anything else on the agenda that I need you and Pam to advise me on? Is there anything I forgot? Okay. Thank you, Pam. Thanks. Aaron's gonna take over as district clerk for the last piece.
Moving on, Mike,
Yeah.
no, Jeff, got him looking, thinking Mike's here too, but Jeff, what do you got for us?
Am I up?
How are you,
Yeah.
Mr. Robbins?
Okay. Yeah, Mike apologizes for not being here. He
No,
is
it's all right.
really not feeling well, and I didn't wanna ride in the car with him the whole way. So
Yeah, right.
So, so I'm just giving you a quick update and then certainly be able to take any questions you have. I'll just start with everything I know, which isn't a lot, so Chris can fill in for me. But phase 1 is done and complete, which is your roofing project. Phase 2 has started construction, which is the addition and all the other work associated with that, some of the site work and miscellaneous renovation work throughout the building. And that's scheduled to go on through the whole year, essentially. The goal is to be wrapped up before school starts next year with all of that scope of work. Came in under budget, as you all know, so that's good news. We're really excited about that, given some of the bidding climate that we've seen this year. That's something to be really proud of, because there's a lot of projects that have not come in under budget. So that's good. The capital outlay project, which is your annual $100,000 project, has been submitted to the state. It has architectural approval, and mechanical approval we're waiting for. There was an addendum required, we've submitted that, and we're waiting for them to do their final review on that and get back to us. So we hope to go to bid, hopefully by November, that kind of time frame. Hopefully next month or so, and be able to schedule that work. It's gonna be a bit of a challenge, but schedule some of that over the school year and then over breaks and possibly, we'll have to talk more, Chris, but maybe near the end of the school year where we gotta empty some space, so we'll work through those details. The solar project that we've talked about, you wanna talk about that a little bit?
Please.
Yeah, so that's been a struggle. Essentially, I can't get the state education department to make a decision on what they're gonna aid and what they're not gonna aid. So.
Yeah, they're pushing for
I know.
all this renewable energy and the big project in Buffalo.
Which is the governor's office.
Yeah.
Right? So getting that down the line to the people
Yeah.
we're dealing with is not so easy. So the couple big questions is what land will qualify for a qualifying project, and we've talked about that before, whether you have to own it or if you could lease it, if it has to be connected to your existing property or if it can be remote location, all those questions. The simple answer should be if it's a long-term lease or owned by you and it's connected to your school site, it should be an aidable project, okay? But they won't tell me that. They won't come out and say, yes, we will approve that project and give you aid. So, and I've been pressing them since we met last, or 3 months or whatever, on this question multiple times. And the last response, which was about a week ago, was, we're not sure if we want to be in the solar business. Okay, right, how does that set?
The truth be known.
Yeah. So, so then my last question to her was, who is gonna answer this question and what is gonna be your process to get the answer? Because if we need to insert ourselves in that process somewhere, we'll do that. And you can imagine, I have multiple districts that are trying to do this. You got solar companies that are trying to move projects forward, and the solar companies just want to go.
Right.
But there's quite a bit of investment for you to go forward not knowing if you're gonna get aid back or not. So I'm not that comfortable moving forward without having those answers.
Now,
We also-
hasn't,
Yeah.
Can we also go through like, New York Power Authority? I know they're doing a big thing with schools, I just met with them today, that they're funding almost a full project
Right.
for even without.
with NYSERDA and the, utilities.
Right, so, the proposal that was put together
Right.
included, about $500,000 worth of NYSERDA grants
Right.
to offset the costs. So we're already kind of working that angle as part of the package.
So you're looking like 50% versus 90% if it's state aidable. You're getting a lot more if it's state aidable, right? Along with the NYSERDA and, the utilities.
So, talk round numbers from that. Okay, the cost of what, was proposed, which was about a 2 megawatt system, okay, is in the, I think, $3.5 million range. Okay, something like that. $500,000 being funded by NYSERDA brings it down to $3 million. I think that produced, here, let me put this in front of me, make sure I'm not giving you bad information. Okay, so, yeah, it was 3.7 is the implementation cost. NYSERDA was about $500,000, just over, okay? And that brought the cost down to 3.2 million, okay? And your savings was about 3.5 million, okay? So for 18 years, you really end up saving 300,000, not a huge number. Now, if you put aid
Right.
into it, at, you know, here they just did 80%, but, you know, your aid is, I think, higher than that, right? At 80%, that gives you another 2.5 million. So that's a huge impact, right? If you get aid on this, it totally blows us out of the water. But the project has to qualify to pay for itself in 18 years in order to qualify for, we're doing this under the umbrella of an energy performance contract. Okay? And it has to show that it can pay for itself with a NYSERDA grant in 18 years. Okay? So that's where you're getting, you know, a couple $100,000 worth of savings. It qualifies, now it qualifies for state aid under the umbrella of a typical energy performance contract.
Now, hasn't precedences already been?
But one
constructed?
project.
Oh, one project.
One project
Okay.
at Candor
Okay.
that was done this way, that I'm aware of, okay? And I think before she opens the floodgates on this
Right,
approach,
Sure.
she wants to know that it's, you know,
Right.
that it's what is acceptable.
So you know what NYSERDA is doing and utilities is they're going through a long period of time where the aid is steadily decreasing. Once you reach a certain quota, and instead of, they started at 100% coverage a long time ago when nobody was going solar.
Right.
And their goal was to get a projected number on solar. So as they were reaching that goal, the aidable from NYSERDA and utility was decreasing.
Right.
Like mine was at 40%, but in the
I think this is
70s.
planned at 25.
Okay, yeah, see, it
And,
keeps decreasing.
but it actually was a little bit lower than that, it came back up.
Okay,
And they were trying to, you know, get some projects plugged in when it was
Right.
back up here a little bit. They set it, I guess, annually, each year they set what
Right.
that percentage will be.
Right.
So,
yeah.
so there's a lot going on with this. I can tell you, we haven't been silent, we've been trying to push the buttons. My recommendation to you is secure land. That's really, no matter what happens, if we had kind of thumbs up from the state to really go to the next level with your utility company, they have to know exactly which land this is gonna go on. So that has to be resolved also, because if you're gonna buy land, that takes a public vote to buy land. I think if you're doing, I think even with a long-term lease, you might need to have that public vote. I'm not sure about that. That's something that you really probably need to talk to your attorney on, at what point do you have to have the public vote? I can also tell you that if you did keep going with the EPC perspective, if you do a public vote, you get your full building aid. If you don't, that's why they did it at 80%. Because without a public vote, it's your full building aid less 10%. So if you were 90%, your aid on an energy performance contract would be 80%. If you get public vote, it's your full amount. One of the benefits of doing an EPC is you don't have to do a public vote, right? But if you know you got support and you gotta vote anyway for the land, possibly, then it's probably worth doing a vote, because then you can get that extra 10% of aid, given they'll approve a solar project. So really, the securing the land is something that really needs to be done, before we can go too much further anyway, because we pressed forward on what it would take to get to an interconnect agreement, right? And going down that road, and the cost was about $6,000 to get through that process. But to even really do that, you gotta determine what land you're gonna have them evaluate. So,
How much property for a 2.5 megawatt?
They say they figure 5 acres per megawatt, but they thought if it was the right land, you could get it down to 8, approximately 8 acres. So I would say you're looking at 8 to 10 would be the appropriate acres to be looking at. They can do some things to squeeze things in and fit it in.
Angle of insulation, like the field over here behind the tennis courts, that would be a great location, great, slightly inclined, yeah, it'd be great.
Oh,
And really right out here by the cemetery, that cornfield.
Right.
Would actually be the most ideal, because the proximity to the power of the grid, yeah.
And so that is owned by following our conversation, the Catholic Church owns that, correct? And then we had talked about that being the ideal location,
That
at
ain't
our
that
retreat. And the question would be next is to approach the Catholic Church about that.
How big is that lot? Is that 8 to 10
I think
acres?
it was 7 acres, if I remember, I'm pulling it from memory.
I don't know the
I
exact,
thought
can't
it was
remember.
like 6. You did, I can
I
figure it out.
did
for
it,
you.
yeah.
6 or 7
Google
acres.
Earth has got a
Oh.
measuring tool, you can just.
Oh, that's
It was close to meeting the cornfield or whatever it is right now, it was close to meeting what our needs would be, and we had some space around
Oh,
that we could add to it, I think, so.
Yeah, that was kind of the thought.
Driveway and-
Yeah.
Yeah, and again, the 8 acres is kind of, them being
Yeah.
conservative. So if you had 7, my guess is they could make it work, or maybe there's some they could put on your property you have now and make that work.
And when you say pay for itself in 18 years, that's just in the savings you'd get because you're making power?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. And the way it looks with RG&E is it would be remote net metered, so they would give you credits back.
Right.
That's how that would play.
True up time.
Down the end of the driveway, between the river and the extension office, there's that big field down there. Who owns that?
Well, it's Fenton at one time.
Yeah, I thought it was Fan too.
I think it
It
still
ain't
is
been
Fenton.
used for anything.
So, the challenge there, I believe that's a floodplain.
Yeah.
Oh.
And
I was thinking the old Belmont school, but that's, granted, that's
It's
a
just not
distance from
attached
here.
to our property.
And the 2 deep wells for the builder down there, they won't let anybody dig or do much down that way.
Well, I could understand not letting Mark Bainbridge in there,
Yeah.
but put in solar panels is nothing.
right, and their process is they drive the steel into the ground. They're not digging and putting a concrete
Oh.
foundation.
Right.
They're driving in, so when it's done, you can pull it out.
Yeah.
In 30 years or whatever, and it's had its life, you can just pull them back out, and the impact on the land is pretty minimal at that point.
Most cost
But you can't be in
effective.
floodplain, so we gotta be sensitive to that across the street.
So my question to you is, do you want me to reach out to a representative from the Catholic Church? Do you want me to reach out to Catholics across the street? Do you want me to reach out to Mike Healy?
The fans would definitely be in the floodplain, I'm guessing.
Yeah.
I heard you say the old Belmont School, I'm not sure if that's.
That would be in the floodplain.
That's in the floodplain. What is the board's wish on this? Is this something you want me to move forward with? Do you want me to wait and
really do with all of our goals as far as moving forward and STEAM and.
I would recommend it.
Check.
I mean, you're talking about both fields, the one next to us here, the Catholic Church owns.
One behind the
And-
cemetery.
And, Mike Healy owns the other field.
I'm guessing we're gonna have better luck with the Catholic.
Well, I was thinking you're gonna have better luck with this particular specific item than you did
Oh,
previously.
Well, that's because
Yeah,
it's all
right.
about the money.
He doesn't have to consult other individuals.
Right, true, true.
So I'm happy to, who would I reach out to as far as the Catholic Church? Is it Steve Rizzuti?
Steve Rizzuti. Marcus Molmack.
Okay,
Yeah, he's one of the
alright, great. I will do that. Mr. Rizzuti and I are overdue for a conversation. Would you like to be? Sure. Any other questions for Jeff? Or Jeff, do you have anything else you wanted to update
Well,
us on?
one more thing on the solar thing that I wanna put out there is, company we've been working with also said that the calculator that is used to determine, some of the savings and, the prices you get for what you're getting and everything, and I think it's issued by NYSERDA, have changed things around, and it's not as, they're still figuring it out, like this just happened about a week and a half ago. And right now, they won't give me another proposal for an EPC, because the numbers aren't working. But they did say they would honor the proposals they have out there, which you're one of them. So they're, as long as it doesn't totally mess things up, they're willing to keep going forward, but they're not willing to do put another one out right now with this current calculator that they're using. So there's just things are changing all the time with this, and you know, if you end up moving forward, there's some official things you need to do. But the other way you could go is do it as a capital project, not an energy performance project. Okay, so that is still an approach that possibly could be done if the state's gonna aid it as construction. You know, the main reason to do it as an EPC is, you know, you get the benefit of doing it quicker than waiting for a vote and doing some of that, but.
I think your recommendation for us to at least pursue land.
Yeah.
Because it may not even be an option that's feasible for us.
Exactly.
I'll be glad to take it out in that way. Chris or Jeff, is there anything else you want to update us on this project that's going forward, phase 2? I mean, we've been moving forward, that's for certain. So. Are any questions the board members have on?
Yeah,
on
no more
any
leaks,
questions?
no more leaks in the phase 1. I know right after, we had some big rain here a while ago, and they said there was some leaks upstairs. It was backing up during summer school.
Yeah. Oh, that was driving rain with that door open on.
Yeah.
Air cooler.
Yeah.
All right, well, thank you, gentlemen, appreciate it.
Thank you.
Appreciate you. Jeff, tell Mike we hope he feels better.
Yeah.
Have a safe trip back, thanks for making a long ride.
Oh, no, it's not bad at all for me, it's good.
Mrs. McCarmel and Mrs. Miles.
It looked, I've got a real dark background on that, can you guys see it okay?
Yeah.
Is it okay?
With white grading on a blackboard and shit.
That's what I was going for.
Chalk on the board.
It really was what I was going for.
Have a good, safe ride.
Trying to get a little contrast. So here's,
I would like to.
well, you're first.
That's fine. I just wanted that here.
No.
Oh,
I did dress.
you didn't get into hair and makeup before?
Yeah. I don't know, I had it done for my son's wedding, and I was like, I'm just gonna hire someone to always do my makeup for
There
me.
you go, yeah.
It was just so.
Oh, we wanna zoom right in on them, that's fine, that's absolutely fine.
You just can't see the screen, really.
Can you see the screen there at all?
Pretty dark.
Want me to kill the light?
Oh, there we go. There you go.
That's better, you can see the writing now, I think, through the iPad.
Yeah, okay. Okay.
Please.
So, this is our traditional October. data update to the Board of Education, where we look at assessment data, and we look at some discipline data. Paula, in her role as Dean of Students, is going to do a little student behavior data update for you.
So this is data from the 2017-18 school year, and in looking back through our referrals, which were down 20%, our most common evidence behaviors were inappropriate language, disrespect, insubordination, disruptive behavior, tardy or skipping, and then horseplay or inappropriate physical action. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about interventions and action steps that we took to remedy those behaviors. And those include our PBIS, that's our Positive Behavior Intervention and Student Support Program. And you may have, many of you I've known you to come to our assemblies. We have our character assemblies, which is part of that program, where we recognize students for good behavior and for exhibiting the character traits that make up good moral character. And we also have our PAWS program, where students get positive reinforcement and a reward system through our PAWS program for exhibiting those good behaviors. We also have counseling and conferring with the student. When we have a behavior, the first line of defense is the classroom teacher. And the classroom teacher will address the student and reinforce the behavior that we want to see. But that also extends outside of the classroom on occasion with your principals, dean of students, guidance, support staff, and social workers as needed. We do work with parents or parent contact whenever there's a behavior concern, and we often will call parents in to meet with them if we have a greater concern, and we troubleshoot together and problem solve together, and we work together as a team. Direct instruction occurs on many levels. Obviously, the classroom teacher provides direct instruction. Administrators and teachers reinforce in the hallway for good behavior that we want to see. Guidance supports us by providing in-class teaching in the classroom, and we do have some outside providers doing some in-class teaching as well. We do have a number of student assemblies that we offer throughout the school year. And we have RTI interventions. RTI is our response to intervention support program. And through that program, we meet as a group, team of teachers, and those who work with the child, and we look at what the problem areas are, and we create an action plan to implement and support that student to remedy those behaviors. We also have modeling. Obviously, we want to role model good behavior for students, and guidance supports that by meeting with teachers to talk to them about any strategies that they might implement in the classroom. And as you know, as part of our discipline procedure, students may lose a privilege if the behavior is addressed and they don't comply in the future. They may find themselves on the ineligibility list. You're probably familiar with our learner behaviors, which reinforce the behaviors that we want to see for good academics and good behaviors. It may be a loss of privilege in choosing their own seat, maybe in the cafeteria or on the bus. We also have a Berkshire program. Elise Brown works with our Berkshire program here, and that program specifically is for school and home-based placement prevention, and she works with students who are truant to school. She works with the parents. There's a lot of parent involvement as part of the requirement of this program. She tries to assist the family and the student to improve their grades and their effort toward their homework and their classwork. And it's also meant to prevent the filing of a PINS referral or a PINS petition or placement. So that program is very helpful as well. It also looks to increase student involvement in the school, to make that home-school connection and get students involved in school, and to have a person that they can connect with in the school building. And last, we have our progressive consequences according to our code of conduct and our student handbook. We do look to seek out a progression of consequences that are appropriate to the behavior that's exhibited, and those are listed here. And we also have professional development that we offer for teachers to educate them on students who live with trauma, to educate them on behavioral strategies and different things that they can implement in their classroom when dealing with a student. Are there any questions?
Is our hallway working?
Yes, I've seen a great improvement in the hallway. I know in the past, when I first got here, we would see students tardy to class, and that was something that we focused on one of my first or second years here. And this year I've been commenting every day, I'm pleasantly surprised because they're out of the hallway 5 minutes ahead of time. So we've seen a great improvement in that, and that's all because of our teachers and really focusing on it as a building. Teachers have been proactive by stepping out into the hallway in between classes to observe or standing in their doorway to welcome the students in class, but at the same time you can see what's happening in the hallway and address anything as needed. So we've seen a great improvement in that. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul.
So we're gonna start looking at some Regents exam results. So these are June. You will notice that I do not have ELA in there. Only 11 students took the ELA Regents exam in June because the bulk of our students take it in January. That is a practice that Mr. Anger started several years ago when the Regents exam was shifting. And so if students do well, they do not take it again. So we had 11 students take it in June, 6 students passed, and 1 student passed to mastery. Mastery being 85 and above. So these are our number of students tested, our pass rate, which is 65 and above, and then of the students who passed, those are our mastery rates. With scores of 85 and above. You'll notice the 100%. When you look at our pass rates, really earth science. This was Mr. Van Tassel was so proud of that. He said that's the best pass rate he's ever had. He really was just. I've never seen him glow, so he was glowing. Geometry, Algebra 2. This was a new exam. Global Studies Transition was a new transition exam. 89% passing, but 53% mastery. That's huge. U.S. History, 100% pass rate, 76% mastery. Because of these two that we were recognized in Business First. And that was based on our 2017 Regents exams. So I anticipate we will be equally as enamored in Business First coming next year as well. Do you have any questions? Our high school teachers develop their own priority standards, dig deep into the data. Some of the very reflective, for instance, our living environment teacher found that a lot of the questions the students missed were really around key vocabulary. It was reflective, for instance, they missed every single question that had the word catalyst in it because they didn't understand. And catalyst expands across all content areas. So when we look at the importance of really making sure kids understand the vocabulary and using that vocabulary in our classes, that was something that our teaching staff identified through analyzing their data and comparing it with the questions on the Regents exams. And we do that work in the summer. Any questions on our June grades? So this was the big disclaimer when I pulled our data, our state assessment data. Due to the state's new 2-session test design and performance standards, the 2018 grades 3 through 8 ELA and math results cannot be compared with prior year results. So basically they're saying it's a different test. So we have a new baseline this year, and we're going to be able to compare this year, 2019 and 2020, but 2021 is going to bring a brand new baseline because all of the assessments will be based on the next generation standards. So they're saying we really can't compare because it's a different test. Although you will see they did compare because I pulled my data from them. So they did compare even though they said you really can't compare. I took this right off the state website. So I just kind of wanted you to get a feel for the statewide results I'm gonna go statewide, countywide, and then drill down to our student performance. So the statewide combined grades in ELA in 2017 was roughly 40% proficient. Jumped to 45 in 2018. Math, 40%, 45% proficient. And one of the most exciting things about this data that you're going to see reflected is our ELA achievement. I'm really proud of where we are because I save all these presentations, and when I look back, we really struggled for several years in ELA. And so here's Allegheny County. And you can see we're now competitive with our sister schools here in Allegheny County. And if I go back, we're a little bit below the state. But in the past, we've been significantly below state performance. So this is huge. Our math is still an area of struggle for us. And that's something we're going to begin, we've been addressing, but we're really gonna hammer it hard this year and take it into next summer, just like we did with the ELA.
Do we really have a relatively young math department?
We have had significant turnover in our math department.
Secondary level, but remember it's 3 through 8.
Yes.
Oh, okay.
So predominantly the majority of the scores are 3
Okay.
through 8 here. The other piece of this that is to keep in mind is while we focus a lot on the reading strategies and writing strategies, they're going to filter into math. And certainly we've looked at math, we've looked at interventions and strategies to improve our math scores.
Okay.
We continue to have what we call priority standards. And so based upon the work that Carol does in the summer, they identify the standards that we've struggled on, they identify those, and then they say, okay, what are the things that we're going to do consistently throughout the year to build student skill set along those standard lines. So that is going to continue, that work is going to continue along those lines. So, I think Raleigh probably appreciates that, we have a young math department, but the reality is we've had not only have we had turnover within the grade levels too, and I'll be frank, I think that it's a little easier for ELA when they're coming in as elementary teacher. That's my bias. Correct me if I'm wrong, Carol. But as a math person coming in, that's something that takes a couple of years to do. We've had some change in teachers in those 3 through 8 classes.
When I met with teachers this summer, being very reflective, especially, I'm going to show you here. We looked at 3rd grade. If you consider the 3rd grade assessment to be the exit outcome for primary, okay, we had a total of 52% students proficient, which is huge for us. This was amazing. But our numbers drop as we hit the upper grades. And so I actually had, this summer, I brought our 5, 6, and 7, 8 teachers in separately. And we looked at the data, not just like 2016 grade 6, 2017 grade 6, 2018 grade 6, which is one way. But we also looked at the kids coming through the cohort. How did they do in 3rd grade, 4th grade, 5th grade, 6th grade, 7th grade, 8th grade? And it was rather shocking to see the students were not making any gains. And so I said to them, we've got to, we're not clicking, something is not clicking. I need us to all sit together and figure out what it is that isn't working. Are we not being consistent in delivery? Why is there such a huge drop off as we hit? So our faculty is aware of this. They know that in October, I'll be bringing our teacher leaders in. They know that it's going to be a focus. I said, do we go with a program? Because if we buy into program, we've used the modules. Don't think the modules are working for us at this point. But if we buy into program, everyone has to agree to use the program with fidelity. So we need to have those conversations. But they understand that there's a huge drop off. But this was very encouraging. Because our K-3 teachers actually like the modules because they're so hands-on, but they do take a huge jump when we hit 4th grade. And math really jumps conceptually for the kids.
I subbed for the upper elementary in the junior high a lot. Of course, this was some years ago, but I noticed I know the purpose of the new math, you call it new math, it's just a different way of doing it. And I noticed that some of the teachers struggled, and I mean, they didn't struggle as much as the students, but they struggled enough where it influenced the kids. I mean, and so, you just trickle down to the kids, and then people start pushing the panic button, and that takes a while to get through that. That's why I ask if it's I'm thinking that the younger teachers that are coming through teachers' colleges are learning the new approach, but then again, they're modifying it
Well,
all
I think
the
it's a
time.
good hypothesis. Here's the second half of this. This is one snapshot, and by no means are we defined as a school or as a district by our performance on 3-4 assessments.
Right.
This is us in comparison in a snapshot in time to other places in
Right.
the state. So while we're gonna continue to focus on how we can make sure that our kids have the skill sets necessary to be successful, second half of that is, that may not be the ultimate definition of their success. Because when Carol drills down, and she says, okay, we haven't seen progress that we're at the level of progress that we want, it's not measuring for the socio-emotional pieces that we're putting in place, it's not measuring for all the other good things that we're doing.
And this was the math slide, we were looking at ELA, so I apologize, we had 73% proficient in math at grade 3. But 27% at level 4.
That's a huge increase.
Yeah.
You finally hit, that's huge.
Right.
So I think there's a couple different things going on when we look at mathematics. I think you're right, number one, it's definitely teachers' comfort level.
Yes.
And I speak that for myself, because I know, like, I used to skim over fractions because I really didn't understand them, until I went through some intense professional development designed to increase my understanding of the mathematics. I think, in talking with teachers, there is not enough emphasis in the modules on foundations and skill development. They jump right into application. And so I said, listen, pull back then. Take the time to develop the skills and foundations. You don't have to rush through before you hit the application levels.
So when you look at Lynn Van Tass, for example, it's the best success ratio, percentage he's had. It's because earth science has been earth science. The same approach, hasn't changed over billions of years.
Exactly.
And he has learned new approaches, new
Literally.
techniques.
Literally.
Yeah, right.
Rocks don't change.
That's right. He's found better approaches for the same curriculum.
Yes, the Regents exam has not changed.
This is being changed.
And it's going to change again.
Yeah.
So we really need to be proactive because we know it's
Right,
going to
yes,
change
you have to
again.
be proactive.
So when we look at our mathematics, so finally branching into this level 4. And looking at our proficiency rates, but again, seeing that drop off.
And again, want to frame this clearly for you. This is great to see. Like an example, Carol, can you go back to the last slide?
Yeah, well, this is ELA. Yep,
Oh, I was going back to math.
You want math?
Yeah. Look at, we have 17 of our 8th grade students. You know we have more than 17 8th grade students. And so when the students who take it in 8th grade, all of the ones who don't take it are the ones who have accelerated into algebra. So one of the conversations we're having here is, does this make sense? What are we gaining by accelerating kids into algebra 1? We've had the same conversation about the environment. What are we gaining? Particularly, the theory is you gain on the back end. So that if you accelerate your algebra students, they can take college courses in the back end. At science right now, it's one of the years we're not offering the level of science that we'd like to be. We don't have the college level academic sciences on that. So the guidance, and then Sarah will be having those conversations, is does this make sense that you need to do? And then more importantly, what are the priorities of the differences between 8th grade math and the algebra? What are the things that they need to be focusing on to be the most successful when they leave us? And so those are the conversations that Carol's also doing as well. So again, it's just another example of how this can be. You look at that and say, well, look, our 8th grade students are performing incredibly well. Nobody got level 3 or 4. Nobody's proficient. Well, yeah, that's true. But those 17 are also those students who are,
They struggle.
struggling most.
So just
If
going
you take that
backwards.
8th grade class, say, and you go through in and do the back years,
Mm-hmm.
is that 8th grade class continually performed at a lower level than say?
Yes. Well, they have not, we looked at it both ways. So they have not shown the growth that we would have liked to have seen, coming from 4 to 5 to 6 to 7 to 8.
But yeah, we still threw them into a high school level class.
Well, those students that were being eligible.
Right.
Okay. And so when you look on the side, when you look at the Regents scores, the Regents algebra scores, for example, you have a combination of 8th and 9th graders sitting for those assessments. Now, the majority of the 8th graders do well. Not all, but the majority do well on the Regents, and they're successful in the course. But it's just something to keep in mind.
So yes, so when you look at these 38 7th graders, a chunk of them have been taken out and are in algebra. Okay, so we had a total of 29% students proficient.
And the point being is that if they're in algebra, they do not take the 8th grade ELA, or 8th grade math assessment, that's why your numbers are 17. You can move on, Carol, thanks. I don't want to belittle the point here.
No, I just wanna take a look at ELA. We have level 4s, we have not seen level 4s. Teachers were so excited. And if you read my board report, early September, we outperformed, every district almost on every single question that was a constructed response question, which was huge for us. We really targeted the writing and using specific strategies consistently across grade level to have our students answer both orally and in writing. And it's reflected in our priority standards and skills, and we really saw gains here. So even though this looks, you're saying, well, that's not a lot proficient, that's growth, and it is competitive with our neighbors here in Allegheny County. So next year we're gonna outperform this goal. Any questions on the ELA? So Dr. Schmidt wanted me to talk a little bit about the interventions that we're putting in place. If you remember, last year was our first ever, it was a pilot program, summer academic clinic, and it was focused on, because the students' performance on the iReady, our first graders going to second and our second graders going to third and the number of students we had in intervention was high to the level where it really wasn't acceptable. And when we looked at what was happening, we saw our students were showing significant regression over the summer. So they'd take their iReady in June, they'd be here, they'd come back, and it would take them all the way to January to get back to where they were, and some of them didn't even get back to fall. And so I'm going to show you, we only had 8 to 10 students participate. Next year we'll have more. So if the students came in and they were involved, they had 3 choices. They could participate full day in our summer recreation program. We took them for 30 minutes because one of the things I said to Dr. Schmidt was they don't need a 2.5-hour Title I summer school. They need a 30-minute, get them in, skill them, drill them, send them out. And so that's what we did. And Maureen Kelly, who did the reading, said she was surprised. The kids came with her willingly. They were very competitive in her little groups, trying to beat each other. We looked at 2 foundational skills, their sight words and their nonsense word fluency, which involves phonic application. How do you decode? They're not real words, but you have to be able to decode them and apply those phonics. So these are our students. This was the pre-test in the summer, and this was the post. Look at September. Maintain the gains. Pre, post, maintain the gains. Pre, post, even better, came in stronger. So this student slipped back a little bit, but not here, not to where they came in there in the summer. They maintained their gains. They maintained after they left. In fact, Michelle Palmer and Gloria Prentice, I sent this information out, said, we couldn't believe how good the kids were doing with their words, and we thought, I wonder if this student went to summer academic clinic. And yes, they did. Yes, they did. Look at the nonsense word fluency. The lack of decoding skills. Look at the post. Look at September.
So one of the things to note is the students that were targeted were significantly below grade. Coming up. Now they're not at grade yet, but they're better.
They're a lot better.
And our goal was to see, can we target a specific group of kids with a limited amount of instruction for 5 weeks, 6 weeks.
It's 5 weeks, yeah.
5 weeks, and have an impact, and maintain that impact when we come back, and not see the regression that we typically see from June to September. And so, the answer was a resounding yes, we could do that.
So if that worked for your less achieving students, your lower graded, and you saw the improvement into the fall, so that goes from my hypothesis of full-time, the full year educational process.
But I only brought them in for half an hour.
It's a sound recommendation.
I don't think anyone questions that. There's a lot of research around this.
So
Buddy does.
This was so encouraging, and we'll be looking in January to see where they are in January, because the hope being that we can close that gap, because when they regress so much, we're never closing the gaps. So this was really encouraging. So here's my math. Our Danielle had done she gave me pages of assessing, so I pulled the iReady because it was the easiest thing for me to take out and to show you. So this is student A in fall of 2017. Because remember, these kids came in because they showed significant regression on their iReady. In the fall of 2017, fall of 2018, so we don't have the regression, because traditionally this student would have come in way below a 371. Came up, these are the 2 levels in the core, 70%. Came up 1 level, stayed the same, but if you go to Weight Watchers, they'll tell you, no gain is a win, okay? So if you don't gain weight, it's a win. So no loss, that's a win, okay? Overall growth, 14 points. Came in stronger. 345, 387. Where's my favorite? My favorite little guy. This one. This student, all year, we could not get this student to do anything. Made very little growth. Went from 357 last fall. 4 came in 427, increased 2 levels and up 70 points. And I guarantee you the bulk of that was from that summer session. That student was reportedly very excited to come. And that student received an hour because it was 30 minutes of reading and 30 minutes of math. Okay. And they didn't mind because they played all morning, they had their lunch, they came in, and then they went back out to play. And so
they still had their summer vacation.
They still had their summer
2 weeks
vacation.
there someplace, I'm sure.
They still had their summer vacation. And really, when you looked at our summer enrichment program, I mean, they were having fun.
Yes.
They were learning, but they were having fun. So, and again, they didn't mind. So I budgeted through our consolidated application again. I budgeted a little extra to expand so that we could pick up another grade level. So that would be the hope. So that's one thing we're doing to address student achievement. Okay. We talked about our priority standards, identified K-12, those are posted. We completely rewrote our K-6 ELA curriculum this year. We rewrote it to personalize it to the needs of our student population. We included built-in fluency checks. We've included sight word assessment at K-3 and reteach and enrichment blocks built right in, so that instead of waiting 10, 20 weeks and the kids are this far behind, we're assessing at 5 weeks, we're reteaching, we're moving on. So we're closing those gaps quicker when we rewrote that curriculum. K-3 focuses on reading foundations and comprehension. 4-6 is on comprehension, skill development, and higher level thinking. Lots of word work. We're working with words, prefixes and suffixes, at 4-6, Greek, Roman, Latin, not a lot, about 10-15 minutes a day, which is all you need, because it's boring. And our teacher leaders have been charged with reinforcing the need to weave those priority standards through multiple content areas. So not only now are teachers hearing priority standards from Dr. Schmidt, from me, from principals, and their teacher leaders. So it's being constantly reinforced. Math, again, the priority standards, and we'll have our curriculum subcommittee to look at that trend data and see if we can do for math the trends that we're now seeing in ELA. We can do it. And then to make recommendations. I want the teachers to make recommendations for program improvement. What are we gonna do? Okay. Any questions?
Great job. Any questions from the board? Let's pause here, we've got pizza that's gonna be cold for an hour for you. We'll grab a beverage, grab a slice of pizza, and then we'll transition into the last pieces of work. If you're good with that. You stretch my leg, don't you?
Brian, do you need this on?
I did not.
Okay.
Thank you for asking. Paul and Carol, you're welcome to join us if you want them.